ready to go!
You're listening to By Land and by Sea, powered by the Maritime Professor. Happy National Maritime Day. Did you know it's National Maritime Day? May 22nd every year. And for today's episode, I wanted to talk about not only the system that makes up the maritime engine, but more specifically, the people behind that engine. The people on the waterfront, the people at sea, the people in the terminals, shipyards, and even the people inside the agencies. Because when we talk about returning to American maritime dominance, we can not only be talking about ships, ports, and strategy documents, we have to talk about the workforce. So today I'm joined by someone who has lived that from the ground up, Federal Maritime Commissioner Max Vekich. Hi, welcome back to By Land and by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Began, founder of the Maritime Professor, former FMC International Affairs attorney, and founder of Squall Strategies. By Land and by Sea is your go-to resource for navigating the regulatory side of global ocean shipping. And me? Well, I'm your favorite maritime attorney, aren't I? As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. There is no attorney-client privilege created by this video or this podcast. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So let's get into it, because as you know, ocean shipping moves the world. All right, well, this week is a special episode. Today is National Maritime Day. As I said, happy National Maritime Day. It's observed every year on May 22nd. It goes back to the steamship Savannah, which left Savannah, Georgia, and went across to Liverpool, England on May 22nd, 1819, and became the first steamship to cross the Atlantic. Congress later designated May 22nd as National Maritime Day in 1933. Now, MARAD, the Maritime Administration, describes the day as a time to recognize the maritime industry and the American merchant marine, including the service and sacrifice of merchant mariners during World War II. So yes, National Maritime Day is about history, but it's also about today. Because as we always talk about, the United States is having one of the most serious maritime conversations that we've had in generations. We are talking about rebuilding American maritime strength. We are talking about ships, shipbuilding, ports, cargo, national security, supply chain resilience, and that is the right conversation, but none of it works without people. Ships don't load themselves. Terminals don't run themselves. Cargo doesn't move itself. The supply chain doesn't function unless there are skilled people doing the work. And that's where today's interview comes in. But before we get into that conversation with Commissioner Vekich, I want to flag two quick FMC things that are worth watching, and time's of the essence on at least one of them, so I wanted to bring it up right away. So the first is that the FMC is seeking applicants for new members of the National Shipper Advisory Committee, or NSAC. We talk about NSAC periodically. They were doing a lot of great stuff with their meetings that were happening, I believe it was quarterly at least. But this is the Shipper Advisory Committee created to give importers and exporters a direct advisory voice to the commission. Now, the National Shipper Advisory Committee is made up of 24 members, and it's 12 representatives of exporters and 12 representatives from importers. Now, look, this is only the second charter of this group, and beyond that, this is one of those FMC mechanisms that people really should be paying more attention to. If we want better ocean shipping policy, the Commission needs to hear from people actually using the system. I'm going to say that again. The Commission has to hear from people actually using the system. Importers, exporters, cargo owners, the people dealing with service reliability, billing, documentation, and the real-world friction points in ocean transportation. So if you're in that world, watch the National Shipper Advisory Committee. Watch NSAC. This closes, I believe, in just a week. So I believe it's next week on the 28th, May 28th. Check that date for sure, but it is closing quickly. It was only open for 2 weeks. Look, if you're the right fit, consider putting your name into this. Now, this is just the Shipper Advisory Committee. We are also watching the possible creation of a Ports and Terminals Advisory Committee and an Ocean Carrier and NVOCC Advisory Committees. Those have not been created yet. As far as I know, I think they were in the reauthorization bill. However, this National Shipper Advisory Committee was created, I believe it was created under OSRA 22. It exists. It is there. It's had its first charter already, so this will only be the second running of this advisory committee. This is part of the federal advisory committees that often advise many agencies out there. The FMC has finally taken a role in this with the first charter of the National Shipper Advisory Committee, and now they're on to their second National Shipper Advisory Committee, soliciting the 24 members. Like I said, if you're a right fit, consider putting your name in. Now, the second thing I want to bring up about the FMC, they have a proposed rule out on its rulemaking procedures. Now, that does not sound exceptionally exciting. It's going to get more exciting, or not. This is also including ex parte communications and informal rulemakings. Look, let me translate that a bit. The commission is looking at how and when people can actually talk to the agencies during rulemaking processes. So the proposal would revise the FMC's rulemaking procedures and consolidate informal rulemaking and rulemaking petition requirements. Okay, look, basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to find ways of capturing some of those conversations that happen. Now, look, ex parte communications, yawn, right? But this is why it's important. The FMC's proposal points to case law and ACUS, which is the Administrative Council of the United States, I believe. Is that the acronym? Basically, what this is all doing is finding ways of allowing generally permissible and useful conversations in these processes. ACUS made a recommendation saying that blanket prohibition from ex parte communication, so communications with the agency to private parties outside of the otherwise formal rulemaking process, which is usually notes or comments submitted to the agency. ACUS said in 2014 that blanket prohibition is usually not required or advisable, and that early stage communications can actually help agencies gather information, craft better proposals, and build consensus before a notice of proposed rulemaking is issued. Now, we already know this. The FMC regulates a system that is operationally complicated. We obviously know that. It's carriers, terminals, ports, rail, truck, chassis, warehouse, all of the parts, importers, exporters, documentation, billing, cargo movement. It's the whole ecosystem. Now, if the agency is going to write smart rules, it needs to understand how those rules will hit the actual system. Now, we've seen the agency do a pretty good job of the advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, where they ask questions out to the world, asking, what do you think? We're going to probably do a rulemaking on this or that. What do you think? That's where those ANPRMs come into handy. This is kind of right around that world. It's not a big change. This is actually simply an update of something that the FMC probably was supposed to do a while ago. Many other agencies have already made this change, allowing for these ex parte communications. Now, look, good maritime policy needs input from the people who actually understand the system, and that's what I believe the FMC is doing here. So this is just part of a notice of proposed rulemaking that they're going to be changing just how they do the administrative side of its rulemaking procedures. Look, like I said, not overly exciting, but the NSAC is exciting. You should be watching that. And if you have anything to do with imports or exports, consider joining. All right, now let's get back to the people, because that's what today's episode is all about. National Maritime Day. We are welcoming Commissioner Vekich. So we recorded this for National Maritime Day earlier this week, but today, of this recording going out, it actually also happens to be his birthday. Perfectly fitting. Commissioner Max Vekich birthday was on National Maritime Day. We talk about his path from the waterfront to the Federal Maritime Commission, what longshore work taught him along the way, why labor belongs in the maritime strength conversation, and just how we bring more people into maritime careers today. So let's roll this interview. I think you're going to enjoy it. For this National Maritime Day episode, I wanted to bring in someone who understands maritime truly from the ground up. Commissioner Max Vekich serves on the Federal Maritime Commission and was confirmed by the Senate in February of 2022. But before joining the FMC, Commissioner Vekich spent decades in maritime labor. He was a longshoreman, supercargo, and union officer with the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the ILWU. He served on the Labor Relations Committee for ILWU Local 52 as president of ILWU Local 52 and on the ILWU International Executive Board, tongue twister. He also served in the Washington State House of Representatives from 1983 to 1991, representing Washington's 35th legislative district. During that time, he chaired committees focused on agriculture, trade, and economic development, and commerce and labor. He also served on the Washington State Maritime Bicentennial Commission and the Governor's Industrial Safety Board. And his education also starts in Washington State. He earned his associate degree from Grace Harbor Community College and his bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Puget Sound. So when people call Commissioner Vekich the labor guy, maybe I'm the only one that does that. Commissioner Vekich is the labor guy at the FMC. There is a real story behind that. He brings the perspective of the waterfront, labor leadership, public service, safety, trade, and now federal maritime regulation. And as it turns out, this turned out to be the perfect episode to have Commissioner Vekich on because National Maritime Day is also Commissioner Vekich's birthday. This is truly a celebration, so I mean, meant to be. So today we're going to talk about his path into maritime, what the waterfront taught him, why labor is such an important part of the ocean shipping system, how we get more people into maritime careers today, we got to do, and this once-in-a-lifetime movement around returning to American maritime dominance. So Commissioner Vekich, welcome to By Land and By Sea.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks for having me on the show, and big fan.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's so wonderful. I'm surprised we haven't done this yet, but the second best time is now. So I'm so happy that we are having you on the show now we're recording this a few days in advance, but may I say early, happy birthday, National Maritime Day, May 22nd.
You know, I can't make that up, you know.
That is some skillful planning by your parents. Wow. But because they came from the maritime world, so this is just wonderful that we were able to make this work on May 22nd for your birthday episode. Maybe I'll just call it the Max Vekich birthday episode, also known as Maritime Day.
I would be good with that.
Perfect. Well, so before we get into the FMC, you know, I always want to start with my guests on a little bit more about the person. I really think that this is an opportunity. We talk so much about the FMC and all the issues and topics that are coming up in the agency, but I want to use this time for my listeners to really get to know you a little bit more. So can you walk me through, where did you grow up? What were you thinking about? Did you ever think that maritime is where you might go, even knowing National Maritime Day? When did you figure that out early? Or, when did you know that maritime was going to become such a major part of your life? Talk me through those early years.
Well, my mom and dad met after World War II. And my dad was at Madigan Hospital when he met my mother. He was on a leave to Aberdeen, Washington, Holcomb, Washington, where he was from. And he was in 2 leg casts because he had gotten disabled right after the war in an accident at Fort Lewis. So anyway, where he was stationed. But he was born in Aberdeen and South Aberdeen, which in the Croatian neighborhood. And so he grew up actually speaking Croatian in Aberdeen, Washington, which was not unusual because that part of the town was all Croatian and everybody spoke Croatian. There were Finns next door. There were actually 7 or 8 nationalities in the town that all had ethnic neighborhoods that were all, they didn't melt right away. So there was that wonderful diversity in our town. And so, and it was a tough town, and it was a seaport town. It was a dirty hands town. It was a timber town, but it was also a seaport. So it was Liberty Port. Per capita, Aberdeen had more churches than any other place per capita in the state of Washington. Matched by also they had more taverns per capita than any other place in the state of Washington. And also there was a pretty thriving red light district too. And Aberdeen was known for that. In fact, years later, when I would be in cabs on the East Coast, I'd have these old cab drivers they asked me where I'm from, and I'd say, I'm from Washington. Oh yeah, I was just down in the capital. No, I mean Washington State. And they go, oh, you're from Washington State? I was there during the war. I was either at the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard or I was at Fort Lewis. It was a great place. Well, instantly when they said it was a great place, I knew, well, they had Liberty and they must have made it to Aberdeen, which was a wide open town during the war. Also, a lot of armaments were made there. My mother and my grandmother both made landmines and hand grenades at Lamb's Grace Harbor. So they were rosy riveters, so to speak, but in munitions. and it was a center for logging and lumber production, but it was also lots of fishing. Commercial fishing was big there, so extractive industries. But old time Washington State, timber, fish, manufacturing to some extent, pulp and paper. That was what was going on there, and a lot of unionization of jobs, a lot of unions, and it was a center for the union activity. My dad was a CIO organizer with a guy named Harry Bridges, who went on to found the International Longshoremen Warehousemen's Union. Uh, that was but started off with the ILA, so which is the East Coast Longshore Union, and now the LW is the West Coast Longshore Union. So we all have the roots of a common mother there in the ILA, and I just in fact had a chance to celebrate Harold Daggett's 80th birthday party at his big fundraiser for St. Jude's Hospital, which was a great event. So very proud to have attended.
Well, that's great. Well, and Aberdeen, so Grace Harbor, right? So it's south of Seattle. It's kind of along the Pacific coast there. And it sounds like I didn't realize that there were so many exports that were happening, right? I mean, you're saying wood pulp, fishing, all of that. So a really interesting market anyways for ports and seaports to kind of be a part of, but then having that rich maritime military perspective as well. That must have given you such a wealth of information on, all the different areas that maritime touches, that, you can live by a port, but then to see all the different facets of it as well is pretty interesting.
It really was. And my dad then became a dispatcher for the union, and so that was an elected position. So for many years, I think 25 years, he was the Secretary Treasurer Dispatcher of Local 24 and ILWU. And so he basically, they weren't big enough for a business agent, that sort of model, but he basically roughshod or ramrodded 200 men. There were no women on the docks in those days, and that's changed now. I'd say over 40% or over 20%, maybe upward to high 30s, perhaps, or mid 30s, of women workers on the docks now. But that's been a real change. So that was a period of time. Then he was there, and I had a chance to spend time at the Union Hall with him. When I often he would take me to ships with him. I remember getting slices of pumpkin pie when I was like 10 years old on American ships sailing out of Baltimore. So that was pretty cool. In fact, the first ship I ever worked on was a Kalmar ship, which was owned by the Kalmar, owned by B&O Railroad, taking iron to Bethlehem Steel in Seattle, their Seattle plant, and then coming back to Aberdeen empty and loading with lumber to bring back to Baltimore, Philadelphia.
Oh, wow.
So that was my first experience, actually, was with being on ships, and was through my dad. And he had a real love of vessels and love of ships. When World War II broke out, he had enlisted or signed up for the Navy Reserve. He was married with a couple of kids at the time. And so they didn't take him right away. But then when they needed manpower, because they were going to invade Japan in 1944, they drafted him into the Army. So, which is kind of ironic. I had seven uncles who served in World War II. Or maybe throw my dad in there, 6 uncles and my dad. So they all were veterans of World War II. And so some Navy, some Army. And,
I was going to say, were they all Army? All these maritime men going into the Army?
No, but they all. No, but it's funny. I think my dad and one of his little brothers and 2 of his little brothers ended up in the Army. And so 3 of them ended up in the Navy on destroyers. And so anyway, so they got to see some things. And but we got this strong appreciation of the military in our family, but also everybody in the family is very pro-union. Aberdeen was a union town, and it really helped raise all these immigrant groups up and out of poverty, and the normal people immigrant path in my hometown was most of them immigrated before World War One, and they would get their ticket through some sort of agent or contractor, sign up for 6 months of well, more or less indentured servitude, and they get here and they get to the United States, and then after they put their time in, they'd quit that mill and they'd go join a unionized mill, and so that was the path because better pay, better conditions, and so and that just through through World War One, past World War One, into the Depression, so that unionization really helped small town Washington, develop a broader economic base.
Well, so you have all of this rich maritime history all around you. It sounds like this is the family business. Maritime was the family business, being at the ports, being in and around the port world, being on ships and on vessels. But you found your way over to Grays Harbor Community College. Was that intentionally to try to depart from the maritime? I mean, you could have gone straight to maritime longshore or workforce, or and then you found your way over to University of Puget Sound for political science. So talk to me about, what was appealing about going into political science or kind of maneuvering those choices instead of just going into the family business directly?
Well, the Vietnam War was going on, and we had a draft then. There was no volunteer army. You got drafted, and that was the way it was. And I had plenty of folks and neighbors and friends who were drafted and served in Vietnam, and some didn't. Some decided they'd rather go live in another country. I wasn't too close to those folks, but that was a reality. So in my mind, I thought staying closer to home might be better. Plus, I had a great family. My mom and dad were really amazing people. They're big personalities, and together they started the credit union in Aberdeen, and my mom ended up being the head of the Campfire Girls in Aberdeen, and my dad had been active in the community in alcohol prevention and on the St. Mary's School Board later on, and one of the parochial schools that we ended up going to. So anyway, that was it's home. It was rich. Our relatives were there. Our roots were there, and my dad built a house. Basically one street over from the neighborhood where he was born. So, and he bought all the material from his godmother's son in the hardware store, which was about half a mile away. So, it was solid foundation for the community. And interestingly enough, one of our neighbors, a guy Cobain, and Leland and Iris, they had a grandson who used to drive this Volkswagen minibus, and it had license plates on the back that said Nirvana, because that was Kurt Cobain. And
Wow.
So I remember seeing Kurt Cobain as a kid, knowing Kurt, and as knowing his dad and his mom. And Kurt used to, when he was 5 to 7 to 8 years old, he used to walk around over there in the neighbor yard and around our place too, with a transistor radio stuck to the side of his head, and the reception was always horrible. So I don't know how much that influenced him, but it had to have some effect on him, So, hearing a bad transistor radio reception, but I get a kick out of it. But he was a good kid, and he played with my sister, and they played like they were in a rock band.
Wow.
Which was funny when they were like 6 and 7 years old. And I think she still has the drumsticks. She got to be the drummer. So anyway, that was
That's
fun.
Cool. Do you think any of the songs, do you think you might have made a cameo? Or
No.
I didn't realize that. That is so cool. The stories that you have are so incredible. I'm so happy that one came out. I've never heard that one before.
Well, I've had an interesting life, and I've met some interesting people, and so Yeah.
Well, you helped Kurt Cobain find his career. That's what I heard. No. No.
Well, and there's a lot of talk over the years about this, that, other thing, tough childhood. But I can tell you for certain that his grandparents absolutely worshipped the ground Kurt walked on. Leland and
Wow.
Iris, and in fact, they liked me. I think they liked me better than a couple of their other kids. And and Leland especially, we were always friends, and
Oh, that's
friends of
lovely.
his became friends of mine. And so and Leland was Leland Cobain had gone to Guadalcanal and enlisted in the Marines, but he was like 15 years old, and they
Wow.
hadn't caught it. So he had a breakdown on Guadalcanal during World War II, which was the worst place to be anyway. And when the Marines came, when they came to see him on the island and do an inspection and see what's going on with him, they realized, oh my God, this kid's a couple years too young. He's not supposed to be here. But he still was a veteran, and the Marines always treated him like, and he was one of them.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that was kind of fun. That was fun
Wow.
knowing him and that aspects. But we had a great street in our neighborhood on Scott Street, and it was mostly Croatians. Leland and Iris were a couple of the only Croatians not on the street.
So, did I want to kind of tie it back to the political science piece? Then it sounds like you
Oh,
were a man of the people from birth. That you were always out there talking to the community, working with the community. I mean, just being, that's any kind of good functioning community, right? I mean, you were enjoying where you lived. Is that maybe what drew you over to public service then, and kind of giving back to the community that had given you so much? Talk to me about kind of how did you
well,
find your
that
way?
area, those people loved FDR. He was on everybody's wall, and including our wall. And I mean, the New Deal meant everything, and it was the most democratic precinct probably in the county was where I was. Although that county voted solid democratically until 2016 was the first time they voted for a Republican, and
Wow.
President Trump won the county in 2016. So from 1932 to 2016, a solid run of Democratic victories in the county. So that was the county I was in.
Hmm.
They weren't real at various times, depending on the age groups. But I went to community college at Grace Harbor. I had a charismatic poli sci teacher, and I was much stronger in history than other things. But I thought, I'd rather try to make history than write or read or teach about it. And I didn't. I loved my coaches. Aberdeen High School had a great athletic program. I was an all-conference football player, and when I got offered a football scholarship a number of places and ended up at Grace Harbor College, and where I played behind an All-American nose guard. When you play behind an All-American, that doesn't mean you play much in the games, because the All-American gets to play. When you got an All-American, you play the All-American. So that was
Right.
fun. That I was on the Grace Harbor Choker after being an Aberdeen Bobcat. But all my high school years, we were the league champs. And then when I went to Grace Harbor, we won our division there. And in fact, the last alumni game, I was MVP of the last alumni game that Aberdeen and Holcomb had. They used to have an annual Thanksgiving Day game. However, when you're a nose guard and you're the most valuable player, that doesn't say much about your offense. So it was a losing cause. But anyway, I'm proud of that fact that I was the last MVP of a Thanksgiving Day Aberdeen Holcomb game, which
Oh,
was the
that's
longest rivalry in the state. And the last three were alumni games because they had changed the format of the state playoffs,
nice.
which is more than you wanted to hear about that. But anyway.
And you said that there was another notable name that came from Aberdeen as well.
Well, at Grace Harbor College, of course, is famous for having John Madden having played there, and so John Madden played there. People that I knew who knew John Madden and who played there at the same time said John Madden spent most of his time in Mac's Cigar Store, which is a tavern and a card room, and he was known as being a really sharp poker player. So, which that makes sense. That makes sense. He was a great coach.
That makes sense. Uh-oh, now you're telling all his secrets. Let's get back to maritime. So you
Yeah.
have so you have this maritime kind of just depth within your family, and you have this calling for political service, and from history, and you even just said that you wanted to make the history instead of just read about it or learn about it. Now, how did that? You came out of college, and then where did you go next?
Well, before I came out of college, I ran for precinct committeeman at the age of 18.
Well, there you go. Perfect.
So I got elected actually at the age of 18.
Wow.
But I think mostly because everybody liked my mom and dad. So I was their kid, and I'm Max Jr. And so that was pretty good. The guy I beat though for the job, who had the job for 4 years,
Wow.
he was a great guy. He was just a great guy, but he was he was not that much older. He was probably about 10 years older than I was, and so I always felt a little guilty about that. But he was a loyal supporter always after that, and so in my various moves. So I spent some time as a precinct committeeman, and then I got elected to the state Democratic Committee at the age of 22. And so I met a lot of interesting folks, and also met my late wife Ivy. Had gone to the same high school, but I was 4 years older than she was, and so she knew who I was, but we hadn't met and didn't know each other. And although our sisters were tennis partners, and it was at one of those very same Aberdeen Hoakland football games where she came up and introduced herself to me, and I was handing out football schedules with the vote for Carol Monahan on the schedule. So people didn't, football were not as easy to get as they are now. You don't have a phone just to whip them up. So we had some football schedules made up for the Huskies and the Cougars, and which is Washington State and University of Washington football teams. And then on election day, like it was a game, we had to vote for Monahan. And so I was passing these cards out outside the football game because I was the campaign manager. And with the one time we had a chance to get the most people. And so while I was doing that, my future wife came and introduced herself to me, and I was a goner.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Huge dimples and a twinkle in her eye, and she'd all the right stuff. So anyway.
Oh, well, that's cool. That's so sweet to hear. So let's go back to kind of the progression then. So you actually, that's incredible. I didn't realize that you gotten elected to office at age of 18, and so then you kind of maneuvered.
There's only
it's office. I'll count it. Did you have to raise your right hand and do an oath? I think.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's office.
Well, I ran, and then since I got jumped in early, there was a situation where a state senate appointment happened, and the senator, the same lady I'd helped to get, I had been helping at the game, Carol Monahan. She got beat after she got appointed, and so a Republican named J.T. Quigg took her place and knocked her off, and so. There I am. I'm a young guy, and I have friends in the Democratic Party, and I just graduated. I ended up graduating from UPS with my degree in poli sci, and when I came back home, and of course Ivy's there, and I'm thinking, people are trying to lure her away to Washington State, and I'm thinking, oh, hell no. That's not going to happen. I need to get a job. And so I went and asked my friends at the county commission, who are political allies of mine, and they said, we don't want you to work at the county. We think you'd make a great candidate down the road, and we would like to see you run for legislature when you're ready. Well, I'd always hoped I could be a legislator. I'd been an intern at the legislature, so I'd worked for the local legislators, and one of them had started out the session as a majority leader, But then his great ally, the Speaker of the House, Len Sawyer, got dumped in an internal fight, and I got to be an intern during all this stuff. So I got to see that internal fight. But anyway, I made a number of contacts and friends, and learned a lot. And so that was great. So I was, that was in the 70s. I graduated from college in 76. And in 1980, I ran for the state senate. And so I was 26 years old. And
Wow.
nobody told me that they were counting on me to be the deciding factor in the majority and the minority, and who was going to prevail.
Wow.
Until much later in the race, it's kind of like, and so we did real well. But that year, 1980, a lot happened that year. Ivy also decided we're going to start our family, and we're going to start our family during the campaign. So, it reminds me of Ginger Rogers. She could, do everything Fred does, but backwards in high heels. Well, Ivy decides she's going to, start our family during the campaign, and so, she carried our son until 2 weeks after the election, and so he was kind of on the trail with us, and so
Cool.
that was great. So that was fun. But 3 weeks before that, the election was held, and President Carter had conceded early. So the polls, I think he conceded at 5:30 in East Coast time. Well, the polls are still up on the West Coast, and so I had a lot of phone banking done by supporters, by groups, by unions, by teachers. A lot of my teachers showed up and did phone banking for my campaign. And the Washington Education Association folks they all liked me. I had been editor of the high school newspaper, and they were on strike in 1972, and I had walked a picket line with them until they told me, "Get out of there, kid. This is for the adults. It doesn't help." And so, which I thought, well, that's malarkey. But anyway, I was on the picket line with them in '72, supporting them as they were my teachers, and that was when teacher strikes were illegal. But I don't know how they were going to get any leverage. But it was still everything was kept in balance. So anyway, so I had a lot of teachers, supporters. I had gone to the community college. I'd been student body president there, so I knew a lot of folks there. I just run into people in the Democratic Party. So I met a lot of people, and then I had been a casual longshoreman. And anybody who was anybody at some point in time, especially people who were teachers who had been unemployed, and there were a lot of layoffs at mills, ends up going to the Longshore Hall to get day labor at some point in time. So I met so many folks doing that because I was doing that all the time I was a student. And so, I worked on a lot of ships, and that's really gave me a lot of flexibility too. I could do the politics a little bit, my minor stuff. I was able to run for office later on, and still be and not have to worry about losing a job because my job was day labor. And,
so explain that just a little bit for the listeners, because we all kind of end up in our own little silos, and I feel like this is a part of the overall supply chain that is probably less understood, and still these halls are still how people get their jobs today. So how does that work, right? You sign on. How do you get to join the ILA or the ILWU? And then once you're in, how do you get your jobs? By going to the halls. Can you kind of walk us through that how it works?
Literally, it used to be a ship was in port. If you were signed up with the union, and later on you had to sign up through the unemployment office to be eligible. But they would have a list of people, and the lists were of people who had basically worked in the past down there. And the more you showed up, the higher up you'd work your way up a list. And so, it was just, that was the way it was. Yeah. And there was labor intensive jobs that required a lot of folks. A lot of the cargo was still hand using, hand bucking. Some places apples, oyster seed, pulp especially was really intensive, pulp bales, and the vessels were older and harder to load and required a lot of shoving things into narrow spots and getting a tight stow. And these terms of tight stow, that actually means something. That means getting as much cargo stuffed into a cargo hatch as you can. So especially with things like logs, lumber, pulp, paper, that really was literally what you would do. You'd load these ships were empty boxes, empty metal boxes, until you fill them up. And so, but to get a job, you'd go down to the hiring hall and you'd wait around and they'd call your list. There were the regular A registrants who would get their job first, and sometimes they when they were hired for the duration of the ship. The ship used to be in for like a week to 2 weeks would take to load a ship often, and that loading time progressively decreased over time to where by the time I left in 2004, the log ports, you could load a ship in 5 days. So just one shift, 5 days, and so or five shifts. So that was things got that faster. Of course, they had gone from old steam winches to high-powered cranes. So that's the mechanization and technology continued to increase and improve. So as that happened, the need for demand for people decreased, but the skill level had to go up. So if you wanted more work, you learned how to drive a forklift because there was need for forklift drivers always, and or you learned how to drive a log stacker. There were log stacker drivers needed. So people that came in off the street that knew how to drive forklift or log stacker, they had an edge. And so and later on, people who knew how to drive truck or log truck or semis, as we went to use semis more and more in certain commodities, they had an edge. And dispatch would ask, is anybody out there, when he had a bunch of people they didn't know, anybody drive forklift? And those folks come to the window, then they get jobs. Anybody drive log stacker? They come to the window. So, but as the more you showed up and you got known there, then you'd get on a list. They would put you on a list. And so, but if you didn't show up, no harm, no foul. Of course, you didn't get paid. You didn't make any money. You didn't show up. So you want money, you want to get paid, you got to show up.
That's interesting too, because I feel like some of the maritime industry even today has that kind of feast or famine, with the, you either get chosen, what comes to mind is repair yards, right? I mean, they sometimes have a vessel in, but then they might not get work for a long time. And it sounds like that same concept is kind of that you might be busy for 5 days, 2 weeks at a time, and then all of a sudden you might not have a ship for a while.
Feast or famine ought to be the motto of maritime labor.
It really is.
It's just the way it is. And
that's right.
I feel sorry for people that marry into the industry, that marry people that are into the industry that are unaware that that's the deal, because it's a hard thing to get used to, and that and the uncertainty of when you're going to work and when you're not going to work.
Yeah.
Of course, some of that when you're an individual worker, that's you're your free agent, and you can be your best friend or you can be your worst enemy. You say, I don't feel like working today. I think I'm going to be poor next week. I'm just going to screw it. I'm not going to go to work. Or you say, oh Jesus, we are overextended. I better get an extra shift in here or there or somewhere, or I better hit the road and go to other ports. And we had a very our travel system got more and more regionalized, and the workforce got more nomadic. So I ended up working in Tacoma and Seattle a lot, and they worked our way. And before NAFTA got enacted, there were Canadian longshoremen who would come down and work in the docks, and we could go to Canada before
Yeah.
NAFTA.
Yeah.
Once NAFTA happened, that stopped.
That's
You
so
know?
interesting. Yeah, because ILWU does have Canadian, right, Vancouver, I believe, right? They have yeah. So that
Oh,
I've
yeah.
always seen that connection and wondered, well, they jumped the border there, but that makes sense.
Well, they were, yeah, and ILW, all longshore workers in British Columbia are ILW members, so
Hmm.
they're all there, and so, and I know lots of there's, I think Halifax is ILA on the east coast of
Okay.
Canada. So,
Yeah. Oh, that's yeah. I guess I've never thought about it much, but that makes a lot of sense and certainly makes sense on how it can all connect. We're talking about the maritime workforce here and how unpredictable it can be for that work. But the other thing that whenever maritime workforce and labor comes up, I think that the piece that should be shouted from the rooftops is how incredibly dangerous this job is. I mean, this is you don't just get like a bruise if you get hit by a container, right? I mean, you don't usually survive those types of any sort of
no,
accidents that happen on the yard. And so, you had been working in the ILWU, at least exposed to it through your father and through others in your community. But your first day on the yard as your own, I'm a worker and I'm here to work was a pretty incredible, significant day for you as well.
well, it was, you use the word yard, Lauren. I would say it was the adjoining dock. I was working on a ship at one dock, and the adjoining dock, a man was killed that day on my first day working. I wasn't on that ship. His name was Frank Rush. Anyway, Frank Rush had a log dump. They had a load of logs dumped on him. Basically, he was in the hold of a ship,
Wow.
and he was working under a guy who was probably inebriated. And the winch driver was a World War II veteran, and he did a lot of self medication because his legs were full of Japanese shrapnel from World War II. So there's lots wrong with this story, and I'm sure the driver's name was Ernie. I'm sure he didn't mean to do it,
Mhm.
but at the same time, he probably was an alcoholic and he wasn't getting the help he needed. So that was a problem. But Frank was a great guy. He was a late to life longshoreman, and he was 59 years old when he got killed.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
and he left a little boy at home, who later became a firefighter and was a really a good man and a good citizen and a good human being. So
Yeah.
and that he was robbed of his dad, and
Yeah.
so that was the first day I worked on the job.
And that's so tough too, because I mean, it can happen in an instant, whatever the circumstances are. Everybody kind of brings their own things to the workforce. I mean, that happens even just in office jobs, but yeah, everybody's bringing their own storyline to the workforce. But the thing is, it's more forgiving in other industries or in other areas, right? But if you are down on the docks, if you are down at the yard, it is less forgiving. That this is an incredibly dangerous job career path that I really think that that's the piece that as some of these labor negotiations and all the different conversations that we've been hearing, shutdowns and strikes and all of these things that are happening. I think that the biggest thing is it's all about safety. It comes down to making sure that you can create an environment that is going to make it the most safe that it can be for all the workers out on the yard, because that's it. Everybody's a human. Everybody brings their sort of thing to it. This was an unfortunate thing that happened, and maybe there were some external factors to it. But on the other hand, there aren't always external factors. Sometimes it's just some sort of error that happens, and it happens just like that. How did that? I'm sure it's clearly stuck with you. How has that experience stayed with you throughout your career? Has that made you, so at this point you're blending political science and public service and actually having achieved the state house and actually serving the people, and you're also having this significant experience at the dock, happening on your first day there. How did that kind of shape where you took your initiatives and your issues that you were championing as you were moving through and trying to change that world that you had said, why don't I change it?
I don't know that I want to change it. I think I wanted to enhance it. I wanted
Enhance.
to
Okay.
make things better. My my community was timber towns. They're no, you know, and my part of town probably had a chip on their shoulder. And I'm kind of was known for having a chip on my shoulder. And I think I come by that honestly. And so you want to improve your area. When I was in legislature, we tried to push things for depressed areas and target industry and help out with jobs and employment. I passed a business and job retention bill when I was in office, but really the things that really make a difference in job creation are education. Colleges do wonders. A community college system in Washington State was huge and strong, and I was a product of that and was a proud ally and did what I could for the community college system. And I think that kept Washington State at times economic problems, period of times when there was not a robust national economy. It really kept Washington State from going, into the garbage. It kept us afloat, and so the strong education system was great. But I also big infrastructure projects. You can't beat them. They just can't beat them. They create jobs. When I was a freshman legislator, Port of Grace Harbor came to me and said, Max, we got this problem. President Reagan's going to bring this new federalism issue forward, and Senator Henry M. Johnson's had got us money to deepen our navigation channel. And there were two harbors on the Pacific coast in Washington State. There were only two harbors in the United States and Washington State the American harbors that ships came in, Willapa Harbor and Grace Harbor. And the Port of Grace Harbor is telling me, well, the Corps of Engineers decided they can't keep two harbors going. They're too expensive. There's only going to be one harbor. So it's going to be Grace Harbor. Willapa Bay is going to be allowed to silt up, and ships aren't going to come in there. So, but we have our navigation project we need to take to 40 feet. And we have the money, and Congress has said yes, but now the new administration says they want a local match. Well, the area is hurting. So, Max, we need you to get us $25 million to help with the local match. No place in the country, no state in the country had ever got involved with a dredging project. That's federal and federal government. And time was going on. Local governments got sucked into it, but Washington State, I believe, was the first state to donate and have money into that match. And that was what I was tasked with, and I accomplished that. It didn't hurt that the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee was a guy I drank beer with and played Trivial Pursuit with, a guy named Dan Grimm, who goes on to become state treasurer later on, and he'd been born in Aberdeen. But nobody knew that, but I knew that. And so Grimm was gracious and helpful, and it was the one thing I really needed to bring home. And because that channel got the match, they were able to deepen that channel, and ships, bigger ships come in there now, and they've been able to build on that. In fact, it's become, instead of a log exporting port, which they do a little bit, they are the primary supplier of soybean meal to the Pacific Rim through AGP, an Omaha-based co-op. That is a big deal for ag. And so they transitioned to that, and there's now huge silos there. There's more docks, and there's a deeper navigation channel. And that happened because of that effort we made. But again, I found it was relationships you make. The previous guy I'd interned for, Bob Charette, he'd always wanted to get a highway bypass around the city so that tourists wouldn't clog the city up. And when we had these razor clam tides, and because people from everywhere in the world would just descend upon us, and you couldn't get across the street. So his big goal was, get a highway bypass. Well, no one would let him have the highway bypass because he managed to tick people off over the course of a session. And so even though he had probably the most power of any legislator we'd had in a long time, they wouldn't let him have a highway bypass. So they would always deny it. And so I didn't make that mistake. I'd seen Bob had alienated people, and I thought, no, I'm not going to be that guy. I get a chance to hit a home run. We're going to do this, and we did. And so, and we also had a bunch of local legislators in adjoining districts. After Carter had conceded and I lost that state Senate race, they had redistricted, and the Republicans changed the district and divided the county I was in into 3 different districts. So in the short term, we were able to try to make lemonade out of lemons. And so there were a group of 3 districts together. We were able to form a cloud. We called it the Coastal Caucus. And we got some stuff done. And that was one of the big accomplishments we got done.
That's cool. And you got the 25 million that that's great. And which harbor, which dredging channel was that? Was that into Grace Harbor?
That was Grace Harbor. The one that was allowed to silt up was Willapa Bay. And Willapa Bay is known for its oysters. I mean, you can find Willapa oysters at the Grand Central Oyster Bar, which we just were at last week during the Navy League. My wife thought, Max, you got to see this place. And
that's cool.
So, a third of the oysters on there were from Washington State. And I thought, that was really cool.
Do you know what's something that I learned while I was out west? So I lived in Silverdale for a little bit. We were, like we've talked before, Pacific Northwest, beautiful. I mean, it was just the hardiness of the people. Being from northern Michigan myself, the fact that I was living in a place that was like, yeah, it's raining, so what? You just put on a jacket and go. I just love that, the weather is the weather. You just keep moving. But one thing that I learned about the oysters out there is that you can tell by the shell, and I don't know if this is an absolute, but you can tell by the shell, if it's more of a jagged shell, then it's more likely to be a West Coast, versus if it's more of a smoother shell, it's more likely to be an East Coast. And I guess it's from the rockiness of the kind of soil sediment versus the more sandy soil sediment that's on the East Coast. I think I have that right, but that's what I had learned. And so far, my little that has been testing it has been fairly accurate. But the like I said, the hard shell was West Coast. So I don't know if that's true. Have you found that to be true?
I don't know about that one more.
Okay, all right. Well, let's pull it back. Let's pull it back. That's a little anecdotal.
There's so many different varieties now, and they don't all start on the West Coast. I know the ones in Olympia, the oysters from Olympia, tend to be on the smaller side, and they have a little more of a metallic taste to them. So that's another indicator. So.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that is probably oyster connoisseuring a little bit higher than my level, but well, let's bring it back to the FMC now. So you were doing all of this fantastic stuff out in Washington State, really ingrained in the whole system there. And it wasn't until 2022 that you entered into the Federal Maritime Commission. So you came with all of this experience. When you were first named as a nominee, I just kept saying, he's a labor guy. This is incredible. This is so good. We really haven't had that labor voice in quite a long time at the Federal Maritime Commission. So what were some of your priorities coming in? What opportunities did you see to kind of add to the conversation? And what priorities do you still see championing today? I mean, we're moving into this world of, and I'll ask you follow-up questions on this, but the Maritime Action Plan, the return to maritime dominance, 2022 we were still kind of coming out of COVID congestion. There was a lot going on. And then to go from that to now, what are some of the priorities that you've had during your tenure at FMC?
DC is interesting because, I was done with politics after I lost my legislative seat. And then my late wife, Ivy, got breast cancer. And so then I had this transition to being, she had been the parent, she was the parent. She was a super mom. And, she said, you're the provider. I'm going to take care of the kids. You go make the living. That was our role model. That was our business model. So, but when she got sick, all of a sudden, she was the irresistible force, but she'd also been political in her own right. And we had met a guy named Gary Hart in '84, and he was running for president. And she did some advance work for him. And he told her she and I should go to DC. After he got elected, he would be happy to put us to work. And so planted a seed there, and of course he didn't make it, and then when she got sick, I had to readjust and I had to take care of my kids and she wasn't going to die, but there was no way she was going to die. She was going to win. We were going to win. She was going to survive. She was going to prevail. Well, she didn't. She didn't make it. The cancer was very aggressive. She had remission a couple times and bounced back and bounced back. But luckily, I had a great union medical program, and it gave her the tools and the weapons to fight back, and she did. And she had the spirit, but at the end of the day, just too many complications, and the doctors were really pleased, and they were thinking she's going to be the one. She's going to be the one that gets through it all. So
yeah, that's so tough.
So okay, a couple of years after she passes, my union officers, one of them said to me, "Max, look, it's time to pay back." I said, "What do you mean pay back?" "Pay back. The union took care of you and your family when I was sick. I mean, it hit me really when I was at a low point. So don't you think it's time you did something for the union?" I says, "I do what I'm supposed to do. I pay my dues. I show up for work. I go to meetings. Times when you guys have causes. I make phone calls to politicians that I used to serve with. And in fact, that was a funny thing. When I was out of office, the people that I had had been in office with, they would still call me up and they'd ask my opinion on stuff. Of course, why not? My advice cost them nothing. And I was already, they already knew who I was. I was already trusted. So, I was an easy resource. So Gary Locke, Maria Cantwell, Patty Murray, Jay Inslee, those were all friends. Jim McDermott, those were all friends. Denny Heck. Denny Heck was insufferable. He was a congressman. He's now lieutenant governor, but he'd been out of office for a number of years, and he'd if you heard the story from the union come up, he would call them and say, "Hey, how come Max Vekich isn't coming away? I want to see Max. Send Max in." So I got drafted into doing that and did that. So, but back anyway, Ivy passes away, and the union, the local business agent at the union says, "Look, it's time to pay back. And so we need you to step up, and we need you to run for president local." And I'm not a labor politician. I was in politics. I'm not a labor politician. That's a whole different thing. That's a different lane. I had a cousin who had been the international vice president and had run for president of the ILWU, but he was unsuccessful. Got beaten by an LA guy, who then got beat in turn by a Bay Area guy. So he had that lane, and I was a big supporter of his. But no, that's not my lane. I don't want to do it. And but the guilt tripped me into doing it. And so I became president. I was president during the 2000 negotiations. The union got locked out in 2002. I was president of my local during that period of time. There was no need to lock us out. In the 50 years I worked on the docks. I was never on strike. So, all this talk about ILW's been on strike here and there. Between 72 and 2022, there was no strike. There was the last strike ended in 1972, before I started. So that was the last strike there. Now, the ILA's had a strike more recently, and but it was a very short strike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and it was interesting too, coming out of COVID. I saw it. I had been working at the Port of Boston, and it's an operating port, and so when everybody got sent home, and I say everybody, a lot of people didn't. There was essential employees, including a lot of the labor workforce, that wasn't able to get sent home. And so, we saw this through a lot of different labor categories after, when the contracts were up for negotiation at the next opportunity. There was a lot of people are not going to soon forget that when everybody came back to work, there was still an entire workforce that never left and always stayed. And, it was scary for a couple of weeks / months there. So it was a very difficult time. And I just kept saying, I think everybody just wants a good thank you. I mean, more than that. But, I think it kind of came down to, I teach organizational behavior. And one of the things I just kept saying to my students was, I think that everybody just deserves a big thank you here. And there were some categories that certainly were thanked, and others, especially maritime, right? I mean, maritime was forgotten off the essential employees federal list for a few weeks and months before it was realized.
And that's where the FMC came back on my radar. And Commissioner Maffei and Bensel wrote a letter about longshore workers should be considered essential workers because we were denied and we weren't considered essential workers. And they put a letter out saying, oh, hold it. So we have all the supply chain problems and all the rest, and we're not essential workers. And I lost my final local I was in. I think we had 125 members. I know 5 of them for a fact died from COVID, and probably there were another 5 that died undiagnosed, but probably COVID related. That's a pretty big chunk. And so there are a lot of protocols the Pacific Maritime Association took later, but it helped getting declared a essential workforce and getting the priority, getting access to supplies and things like that. So, but that didn't happen overnight, and that it took a little bit of a push. And that's where I saw, the Federal Maritime Commission got in the game. Oh, that's good. That's good. Maybe I should think about that someday.
Well, and like I said, I'm glad that there is a labor voice that, in whatever varying degree, but you were leadership of labor, you worked and you went and you were in the halls. I mean, you know it. I mean, you came from that world. And so I love that there is that moment or that part of the conversation being added to it, because labor needs to be part of all conversations, because we need, it's a crucial element to a fully functioning and fully returning maritime operating system. And so that leads me into the world that we're in today, which is an incredible, once in a lifetime, exciting moment for all of maritime. And it took this leader to get us there, but it feels like, and I think I've heard you say this before, that it's a nonpartisan issue, but this is an opportunity of a lifetime to really find a way forward for maritime to return. I was speaking with Matt Leach, CEO of Ports America, a few weeks ago, and he had mentioned, he was part of Sealand when they got sold off in 1990, 2000. And it struck me, and it was so wild to me, because even having done all of this work at the FMC and all this ocean shipment, international ocean movement, I never realized that Sealand was not only the #1 ocean carrier in the world, US based, but it was international. It was above all, but it was only 26 years ago that it went away. And so what does this returning to maritime dominance mean? To me, it almost felt like it was 60, 70 years ago that we were maritime dominant. No, we were maritime dominant in ocean shipping just 26 years ago. So what does this mean to you now that we are on this path with the administration leading us of returning to maritime dominance here?
Well, you're right. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, although, in my lifetime, we were there before. So now it was a mistake. It was a big mistake. And, I think capital thought they're going to go on the cheap route. And when does that ever pay off? It doesn't seem, bargain basement, you're going to get bargain basement results. And so long term, short term, you can do that, but long term, there's a cost to pay. So I think the resurgence, I think it's been a great thing for this administration to engage in this issue. And I think it's been probably the best thing I've seen this administration do. And full disclosure, though, I am a Democratic appointee from the Biden administration on this commission, and we're both Democrats and Republicans on the commission. So, but Mitch McConnell said he had referred to maritime issues as bipartisan. But my experience on this commission, it's been nonpartisan. We don't see things as parties when it comes to maritime. We see things as maritime, and that's how we've been working here. We have a new chairman, Laura DeBella, who's brought some good energy. She joins Dan Maffei and Rebecca Dye, who are veteran commissioners, have been around, both former congressional staffers. They have a lot of talent, and they a lot of practical experience. So we see the world similarly. I think my office has been the most involved with the map because we were able to get involved early on and provide some of the ideas about how you would build this. I mean, Senator Kelly has a SHIPS Act thing he's been working on, and there have been Republican congressmen doing various things on this. John Garamendi, Dusty Miller were leaders of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act previously, which really showed this possible to get legislation done and to make a difference. And that was to solve the supply chain problems from COVID. And a lot has happened. A lot of reforms have happened. The agency been deeply involved in rulemaking to make it more fair for American farmers, to make it more fair for American manufacturers and American exporters. And all those things have happened now and are in place. And the courts have all validated and confirmed that the FMC had the power to do the rules. Yeah, that's a problem. When you got a big problem, you need legislation. It takes 2 or 3 years to get things enacted to fix the problem. I think you don't see you see an improvement in customer service by the foreign carriers, which is really who the FMC regulates. Mostly we regulate the foreign companies, the big guys, the ones who own the ships. That's who we regulate. And we try to make sure that they don't screw the American shippers. I don't know if I can say that, but I just said it. So, so anyway, and shipper, and, another thing, Lauren, is funny about the waterfront. You know this because we are really weird when it comes to naming things and calling things. I mean, some ports we'll call the same thing 2 or 3 different things, and it depends. May have depend on when they were developed, when they were, the ethnic groups that came in or not, and so it's crazy. And so, like, who is a shipper? Who's a carrier? The carrier are the guys who own the ships. That's not the shippers. The shippers are people that put the stuff in the cargo in the ships, kind of. But that could be a stevedore or that could be a longshoreman. Those are all, and a longshoreman can be a stevedore, but a stevedore can also be a employer who employs longshoremen, and anyway. So
that was an initiative that you had, was creating a glossary, right? You were endeavoring to try to create some consistency.
Not Carl Bensel. Carl Bensel, commissioner, now head of NAWI, North American Waterfront Employers, the unionized employers together, and that's a great place for Carl. But Carl developed a glossary and in working on data, and that was I'm not sure that it was a Rosetta Stone for those people that know what the Rosetta Stone is. But
his MTDI effort, right? The Maritime Transportation Data Initiative, which you were supportive of, but I think I
was supportive of, but I also told him, Carl, this is the Gordian knot, this is the Gordian knot. You're trying to cut the Gordian knot, I mean, God bless you, my friend, but it's tough, and
it's tough.
And the people that tell you they like it, 1 minute will be the same people that tell you they hate it the next minute. I mean, anyway, but he got the glossary done. And so I think that was a big victory. I had proposed a more minor version of that internally in the ILW one time.
That's what I was remembering. Yep. Mm-hmm.
At a caucus. And I had suggested we all agree on a glossary of waterfront terms for the West Coast. And the caucus is made up of 100 delegates from around the up and down the coast, from San Diego to Bellingham. So all the West Coast unionized longshoremen are part of this thing. And it's about 100 people. Boy, oh boy, I am surprised I got out of there alive. They were so ticked to me for that, bringing that up and saying that. And some sacred cows are sacred cows. And so
well, it is a good idea. And your point being, some of this was developed just over years and years and years of somebody calling it something, right? Even the word longshoreman, right? It was a longshoreman, like they were going along the shore. I mean, that's, some of these terms in maritime are I mean, as old as time itself. I mean, maritime has been one of
Yeah,
the most sustaining industries in the history of humankind. So I think you're right. I think that there could be some streamlining of terms and use cases there, and there's certainly some efforts that are ongoing there. Commissioner Carl Bensel, when he was doing his MTDI, was really digging into some of those difficult topics, and right at the time of COVID congestion, really. I mean, so he was kind of right in the heat of all of it, trying to figure out, well, we needed a little bit more, standardization really is kind of what it comes down
yeah,
to, or some sort of continuity where we're all speaking the same language. And so I do
yeah,
recall he had pointed to, and this is a group that I talk about sometimes on the show, but the Digital Container Shipping Association and
right.
some of the standards that they've been working on to try to help exactly that, streamline so everybody's speaking the same language so that you can create all your different platforms on top of it, but ultimately we're all starting with the same language here. So point well taken. But, I want to kind of come back to that maritime dominance piece, and or at least just kind of this maritime
Oh
action
yeah,
plan.
no, that's important. It's freedom of navigation is vital to our world.
Mhm.
We have this global economy. Global economy was only created because we had freedom of navigation. The only reason we had freedom of navigation is because we had fought wars. We had big navies that backed it up. We had the British, had the Royal Navy. Of course, they had an empire. Well, America supplanted the British after World War II, and we weren't hot on having an empire. We were hot about having markets. So we went to more of a free market system and a free trade system. But you can't do that if some countries are saying, no, you can't sail in our waters.
Mhm.
No, you're prohibited from being here. You're prohibited from being there. No, we have an exclusion zone. No, you've come within, we have forts. We're going to shell your ships. We have missiles. We're going to bomb you. Our whole global economy and model, and I think it's irreversible to try to. Why would you want to destroy that? Because it's worked so well in so many ways. I mean, we have been too keen to offshore jobs from the United States and too keen to send good paying jobs elsewhere. So there should have been better thought and better sense and better policies for that matter. But okay, what do we do now? Well, we got to protect freedom of navigation. And I mean, I get lots of people concerned. Let me know at the FMC that they're concerned about this, and this is what keeps them awake at night. And so, Strait of Hormuz has brought up a lot of this. Before that's the Suez and the Houthis. But even before that, Somali pirates in Malacca Straits. Piracy is a big deal. Piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, and those things were already in existence, but we need to be
Well,
careful, and we need to be sure that we don't throw away foundation, tenet of freedom of seas and freedom of navigation. That's really vital.
and I mean that we're speaking of
So,
the
America,
freedom of.
strong Navy, strong mariners, need jobs. And hey, with AI making it so tough for people to get even interviews, I mean, we got lots of maritime jobs we need filled by good people. And, it's there and they're good paying jobs, but boy, uh, we need them. We need them. Maritime Administration is beating the gong over this. Our agency would like to probably talk more about that. Um, this comes up a lot. This comes up a lot everywhere, every forum. People ask questions about how to get more mariners. And when they use the term mariners, they're really talking about the overall industry.
Yeah,
It seems to me
everybody,
that's
but
really
not
what we're
just
talking about,
maritime.
the maritime industry. How do we get more people involved in that?
That's right.
And I think there's a will, and I think this is the time. And it ties right in with we want to build more ships, need more shipyards. The administration's done I think, a good job of rolling things out slowly, but staking some ground out. Ports across the country are talking about getting back into shipyard business. My old legislative district had a shipyard in it, a naval shipyard, Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, still there.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a few naval shipyards around that, I'm not so sure they can't be reconverted back to building ships if they need to be. Some are doing other things like scrapping ships more, or things like that. So like Bremerton, or was scrapping submarines for a while. So I don't know.
But activity at a shipyard is still learning, right? I mean, it's still the employees that are employed, but then it's also the training of the next generation of shipbuilders and ship workers. I mean, even just being, as you well know, just being around it is enough that you get education on how it all works. And so having whatever the shipyards are doing, having them working, right? That's the biggest thing. We just got to have them working so that way we can pass along some of that generational information, so that even if we have new tech, that's fine. We also need people to understand the old tech of shipbuilding, and that's kind of all over. But we certainly need just a robust maritime workforce, and I think
absolutely
exposure and opportunity.
Absolutely, and we probably need to some extent we need a steel industry. That was all part of the deal. And we need aluminum to some extent, part of the deal. We need component parts for the ships, and
that's right.
But we need a labor force that can build them. We need a labor force that can run them. And we need a labor force that can load them and unload them. So
that's right. Well, this episode was all about National Maritime Day, and part of National Maritime Day is commitment to service. And so one thing that we've often talked about on this show is that there's a program called Military to Mariner, which is the ability of military members to use some of their sea time to actually transition into getting their captain's license or getting some sort of merchant mariner credential that can then be actually used for commercial purposes. I've also heard, and I think you explained this to me, that the ILA and ILWU specifically, actually sometimes can give credit for military service. So, I think that these are two workforces, military members and maritime workforces, who come at the job with gumption and with depth of character and a high level of, workmanship and just intention to do it the right way. So speak a little bit about that. There's a military service credit that you can get.
In the ILWU, when I started out, there was the greatest generation were still in the docks, and those guys, they really knew how to work hard and work smart, and a lot of times working smart was easier. So you wanted to pay attention, and even when you didn't seem like you were learning, you still were learning by doing it with them, and them smacking you on the side of the head and telling you, no, that's not the way to do that. And so that was, that's good. But there was when I started in the 70s, there was the military was all, we still had the draft. And so that got phased out, and we moved to an all volunteer military. That my union started to change too. Of course, there were a lot of Vietnam veterans by this point in time had come back, and many of them had been drafted while they were in the union and had to leave their jobs and go serve. And so when they came back, they started petition for credit for military service, and so that evolved, and ultimately there were more conflicts. Of course, the draft went away. All volunteer military came, but they now in the ILWU, the West Coast, that's the West Coast longshore only, they get credit for their military service, and so as in credit as in industry years towards pension accrual and vacation accrual and things like that. So that's quite a thing. That's quite a great deal. But it was a long, slow process, but they finally got there, and I think that all industries ought to be that. There ought to be credit for your service in the military, or some credit, partial credit, something. But it can't be for nothing, I mean, you're serving your country, and we're all benefiting from that. And so let's reward that and encourage it.
That's great, and that's wonderful to hear. Final question of the day. What advice would you give to someone just starting out that's interested in coming into the maritime industry? What
Go get a TWIC card.
transportation worker identification credential, the TWIC card? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I hated, but get one. Just do it. Go get it. Put the money out there. Get the TWIC card. That gets you in the door. That makes you serious. And so, and then look on the Coast Guard website, other websites about how you get mariner licensing. Think about going to sea. Think about SIU, SUP, IBU, MEBA, Master Mates and Pilots. There's a lot of great maritime unions, and there's a lot of those have entry-level jobs and apprenticeships. So those are great programs. And once you're in the family, you're in the family.
That's right. Yeah, and what great advice too. You can always come ashore later, but just if you have the opportunity to go out to sea, take it. You can always go back later, right? You can just get it going. Like you said, once you're in the family, you're in the family.
That's right. My plan was going to be, I was going to get my longshore in, and then I was going to go have adventures, and then I was going to go try to become a sailor. But life didn't work out that way.
Well, I think your life has worked out just fine. I commend you for your service at the FMC, your service through the years, serving your state of Washington State, and all of your service at the ILWU. Thank you so much, Commissioner Vekich, for joining me today on your birthday, even though we are recording it early. Happy birthday. Happy National Maritime Day. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks, Lauren, and good luck with the podcast, and go USA.
Go USA. There it is. All right. Well, thank you again, and great to see you.
Same here. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, I hope you liked that conversation. It really brings National Maritime Day back to the people, right? Obviously, maritime is about the ships. It's about the cargo, ports, terminals, shipyard, national security. It's about all of that. It's also about the people who make the system work. And that is one of the reasons I like asking my guests some personal questions too. I want to know a little bit more about them. Yes, the subject matter is important, the policy is important, but I want you to get to know the policymaker, the decision maker, the person behind the title, because these decisions aren't just made by abstract agencies floating out there. They're made by people, right? People with careers, people who have had experiences, they have priorities, blind spots, lessons learned, and stories that shape how they see the world. And when I bring my guests on, that's where I hope you are able to understand the person behind the title a little bit more. I hope you enjoy that approach, because I think it makes the policy conversation more useful. When you understand where someone's coming from, you can better understand how they might think about the issues in front of them. So when we talk to returning to American maritime dominance, we can not only talk about the assets, we have to talk about the people who operate them, who build them, who maintain them, who regulate them, and who keep the cargo moving through them. And we also have to talk about the systems, right? Workforce safety training, and also the advisory committees that bring market experience into the room, and the regulatory process that let agencies learn how the system really works before rules harden into final form. But look, the core point here is simple. Maritime strength is not one thing. Of course it's not. It's the ecosystem, the people, the ships, the cargo, the ports, the policy, and the practical systems working together. That's how we're going to move from maritime nostalgia to maritime momentum. So let's keep it going. If you like this episode, be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Want to go deeper on these topics or bring this kind of insight to your team? Visit themaritimprofessor.com to explore corporate trainings, tailored briefings, and on-demand webinars, all designed to make complex maritime regulations practical and easy to understand. And if your organization needs help navigating the legal or strategic side of ocean shipping regulations, head over to Squall Strategies. That's where I provide consulting services, regulatory guidance, and policy support for clients. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So until next time, I'm Lauren Beegan, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and By Sea. See you next time.